Shout out to Caressa for sending me this article. Take a good look at the title of this article. Scientists can't explain puzzling lack of woo-woo outbreaks in Africa. Posted September 4th, 2020. I'm recording this video on September 8th, 2020. Why is it puzzling? Like they literally tell on themselves every single time. Why is it puzzling? Y'all act like y'all really want this thing to be in Africa. And you know what's so crazy? This isn't the first time they've questioned why the virus has not really completely impacted the continent of Africa. They questioned this a couple months ago and they're questioning it again. Maybe it's because they're doing something down there to prevent it from really spreading. They're doing something completely different than what's happening here in the States. Instead of questioning and puzzling why the outbreaks is not affecting them so much, why don't you worry about how you can get the numbers down here in the States? That's what needs to happen here. And like I said, this was not the first time they've questioned that. See, they always need to find a way to make Africa or the continent this disease-ridden place, because for years that's all they've been doing, while simultaneously stealing their resources at the same exact time. It's funny because other places around the world seem to have their numbers down. Maybe not every place, but a few places like New Zealand, which is a predominantly white nation, but they don't question why their numbers are down. Or why China's numbers are down, and that's where it came from, allegedly. But they want to know why there's no outbreaks or there's a lack of outbreaks in Africa. Let's get into this. The novel virus has infected more than 26.35 million people, with just 4 countries accounting for over 15 million cases. They are the United States, Brazil, India, and Russia. The same 4 that have been at the top for months. The U.S. surprised the world when it rose to the top spot in multiple virus statistics, both for the total number of confirmed cases and the number of deaths. Well, considering who we have in office, it's not that surprising. Since then, no other country has surpassed America. And I've said this over and over again. America, the U.S., wasn't even the first country, establishment country, whatever you want to call it, to get the virus. We were like the 4th or 5th, but shot up to the top spot. And like it said in the article, remain in that top spot since then. Nothing has dethroned it. Even with other nations that have higher numbers, their numbers haven't even touched America's numbers. Those who died and those who were affected. But scientists who are studying the pandemic have also identified another surprise of the pandemic. Some expected the African continent to be affected most heavily by the virus, but that wasn't the case. Now listen to that. That's why you always got to pay attention to words. Listen to what they said. But scientists who are studying the pandemic have also identified another surprise. They're surprised that Africa wasn't affected like that. Some expected the African continent, as in all the nations, all the countries in the continent of Africa, to be affected most heavily by the virus. They were expecting the entire continent of Africa, to be heavily impacted by maybe even a huge margin. They were probably expecting the numbers we have here in the States to be the numbers they have over there, and not the other way around. But you always got to pay attention. Why were they surprised by that? And why were they expecting the numbers to be so high? I'm telling you, they want us off this planet. This probably is not only baffling them, but it's probably scaring them, and it's also pissing them off. Like, why is the nation with mostly white people in it the ones being mainly affected by this? But they say that black people here are the most affected. So somebody's lying. There's a conflicting statement here. South Africa stands out when it comes to the number of total cases, with nearly 631,000 infections, but fewer than 15,000 people have died of the virus. These figures are puzzling scientists looking to understand how the virus behaves and how it can be beaten. Well, like I said, maybe the leadership over there, which seems to be true leadership, is actually doing something about this. But they're probably going to go over there and see, do they have a cure over there? Do they have a vaccine that we don't know about? And how do we get it? I'm telling you, that's probably what's running through some of these scientists' minds. They about to invade yet again. Experts expected the same thing to happen in Africa, but it didn't. If anything, Africa is doing better than any other continent. Listen to that. Africa is doing better than any other continent when it comes to dealing with this virus. Any other continent, even continents that have like 0 cases now, they were doing better than. Like they were doing better than New Zealand because they didn't have that many cases. It says both when it comes to cases and casualties. As BBC News explains, even if those numbers are significantly underreported, Africa still has it much better than other continents right now. I thought we were heading toward a disaster, a complete meltdown, Professor Shabir Madhi told BBC News. The UK's top virologist echoed what others must have thought about the African virus outbreak. But South Africa's death rate is almost 7 times lower than in the UK, another predominantly white nation. See, that's what it all boils down to. How is it that the quote-unquote dark continent managed to get a grasp or a grip on this virus before it got a grasp and a grip on them? Like I said, it all goes back to leadership. Because the virus didn't come from Africa. They probably will wish that it did so they could have a reason to go over there again. But see, they put out these images about the continent, with AIDS and all, Ebola and stuff like that. They literally had that going on over there for years. But it makes you question how much of that was embellished. I'm willing to bet a lot. Because this is a global pandemic. AIDS, Ebola, AIDS, that's transmitted through, sex and sharing of needles. Ebola, that was literally contained just to maybe a few countries in Africa, but it didn't blow up like how this one did. This was a global pandemic that touched every inch of the earth. But they can't figure out how Africa wasn't that affected, even though they were affected. It's just that they didn't have higher numbers. That's all it boils down to. It wasn't the fact that they weren't affected, which is what they were surprised by. It was the fact that their numbers wasn't high enough for them to say, oh, well, we weren't surprised that Africa got this many numbers. They are so transparent. Just say what you really want to say. You are trying to figure out how the black people figured out how to duck and dodge this virus better than white people did. That's what it is. Because for years they've always said how stupid we are, how dysfunctional we are. Yet the continent that has the most black people in it managed to figure out how to keep their numbers low, lower than any other nation on the planet. Salim Abdul Karim, the head of the country's virus response team, told the BBC that most African countries don't have a peak, which is surprising. I don't understand why. I'm completely at sea. And see, this is the thing that's getting them too. They're mad because they can't even figure out why this is. Scientists who usually can figure a lot of stuff out can't even figure this out. They're puzzled. They're baffled. They are probably questioning, how did they become a scientist? They don't know what it is. And I hope that they don't find out. Let them figure it out for themselves. Let them pull themselves up by their bootstraps. One hypothesis that can explain the disparity between Africa and other continents concerns the overall age of the population. In general, the population of Africa is younger than in regions hardest hit by the virus. Possibly. Another hypothesis will sound familiar to those who have been following the virus developments closely. Some researchers have shown that other human viruses that cause common colds can elicit an immune response that can provide protection against the virus. South African researchers went to work on that idea. Attempting to analyze 5-year-old blood samples that were conserved from a flu vaccine trial in Soweto. The plan was to look for any evidence that would explain why the African continent is faring much better against the illness than others. Those samples were compromised by technical issues that put a stop to the research, but the idea stands. The same crowded neighborhoods that will lead to the quick spread of the viruses may have protected the population from SARS-CoV-2. It's a hypothesis. Some level of pre-existing cross-protective immunity might explain why the epidemic didn't unfold the way it did in other parts of the world. The protection might be much more intense in highly populated areas in African settings. It might explain why the majority on the continent have asymptomatic or mild infections. I can't think of anything else that would explain the numbers of completely asymptomatic people we're seeing. The numbers are completely unbelievable. Well, believe it. But if that hypothesis is true, why have Brazil and India seen massive virus surges in the past few months? Kareem warned that even considering the evolution of the pandemic on the continent so far, Africa isn't out of the woods. Oh, wouldn't they like that? I'm not sure whether one day the epidemic is going to spread like crazy here, he said. Well, obviously, it sounds like it's more of a genetic thing to me. That's what it sounds like to me. Interesting enough that the continent that has, like I said, the most black people on it out of every nation in the world is the one that's not affected by it the most. But they want to put out there that black people here are the most likely to get it. If that's the case, well, I think we figured out why that is. Look who the majority is in this nation, allegedly. I'm just going to leave y'all on that note. Leave it like on a little cliffhanger, because I think on that last statement right there and with everything that I just said, y'all can pretty much put two and two together of why Africa is really not affected by this and why every other nation is.